Thank you very, very much. And I'm very grateful to be here, that the Institute on Religious Life extended to me the invitation to come and speak to you on the topic, Preaching the Gospel to the Digital Generation, because the topic is such a worthy tribute to Father John Hardon. He really had a strong endorsement of utilizing the mass media to spread the gospel message. And just this morning, I was speaking to Archbishop Burke, and he made the comment that when anything new, whenever there was a new technological advancement, he was like a kid in a candy store wanting to know how it worked and then brainstorming ideas for how could we use this to get our evangelization message across. I'm also really so pleased to see all of the young people who are here at the conference. Thank you for coming to this talk. Hope you can see. If you can't, you're welcome to scoot and face forward, but you're very beautiful. And coming and spending your day today to do this is really a gift to all of us, so thank you. As I look at this topic with you today, stop me at any time if you have a question or a comment, a reflection. I'm a teacher. I teach high school. I really enjoy when the students offer comments. I'm also a coach, which is why I prefer to use a whiteout board behind me more than someone came up and said, "This is the digital talk. Do you have a PowerPoint?" I really prefer to focus on the talk. So stop me at any point and add your own input. I'll be drawing for this topic on my training in the field of institutional social communications. I received a licentiate and a doctoral degree from a program in Rome that's extremely exciting. It's called the Church Communications Program, and it's a 3-tiered study at the graduate level of the humanities, theology, and mass media. And it's meant to package a person to understand the teaching of the church and the message of Christ and how to professionally use the media in the promotion of that message, because you can have the one and you can have the other. But if you don't have both together, there's something lacking. While I was in Rome studying for those degrees, I also was very blessed to spend 3 years working for the Vatican Press Office. I began working as a translator and a marketing intern. The Vatican does have marketing of their services. And then I went on to translate for L'Osservatore Romano newspaper. So I was able to be in touch with the media pulse of the church right at the epicenter. I also currently serve as a co-director of a very exciting apostolate based out of Chicago called the Father John A. Hardon S.J. Media Apostolate. And it was the apostolate Father wanted founded, didn't found in his lifetime, and was founded after Father died. And one of the foundresses, Mrs. Dory Gruss, is here with us today. So it's the mission of the apostolate is to form the faithful in the right use of the means of social communications and to promote their use for the work of evangelization in the modern world. So today we're at a social communications event. There are 2 branches: mass media. So media is a means, a tool to communicate to the masses. That would be the press, radio, television, film, and internet. And then you often hear, particularly when you're reading the teachings of the church, the means of social communications. And that's any other communication in human society between human beings. And so this talk today is a social communications event. If we put it on YouTube, it can become a mass media event. And that would include all the things that you would think of to communicate one to another: advertisements, posters, audio tapes, records, CDs, group communications, conferences. And so Father Hardon, if we think of his life and his ministry, was always doing communications events. He was preaching retreats. He was speaking to conferences. He was having his talks videotaped. There are many, many, many cassettes, CDs, now DVDs of his work. So he was always trying to get his message to as many people as possible, while he was also completely available to the individual. And his one-on-one evangelization was one of the most powerful testimonies of his life. I hope to touch on a few media events that will be known to all of you. The death of Pope John Paul II is a major media event. The current crisis of communications in the church with the sex abuse scandals. And even look at some of the factors in the bullying case that's come out of Massachusetts and an impact of the social communications media And beyond that, to look at Christianity and the potential that we have to reach and form Christians in the modern world through the mass media. We're at a crossroads. We have a message as Christians, the timeless gospel message that exists. The hard part is done. We don't have to have a messaging meeting. We have our message given to us by Christ and handed down. We also have a world of social communications available to us. How do the two intersect? The structure of my talk is going to be taken from the Vatican II document on communications entitled Inter Mirifica, and I brought a copy of the document if anyone would like to take a look at it afterwards. And the teaching of the Eighth Commandment, presented in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. The Catechism of the Catholic Church has a glorious explanation of social communications in its section on the Eighth Commandment. So the Eighth Commandment: you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. What does the Eighth Commandment have to say about the church and media as a modern crossroads of evangelization? Everything. If you turn the Eighth Commandment on its head, it's a call, and it's a very strong call. You shall bear witness to the truth. And I'll repeat that. You shall bear witness to the truth. Capital T on truth, and we're all called to bear witness to Christ with our lives. Given this call, how does it relate to the social communications media? Number 2471 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church says, the duty of Christians to take part in the life of the Church impels them to act as witnesses of the gospel and of the obligations that flow from it. This witness is a transmission of the faith in words and deeds. So how do we use the media to transmit the faith? The answer is threefold, and I put the three on the board so that you can refer to them back as I'm talking. It begins with information. It extends to cultural promotion. And it culminates in formation. And formation is the part of the talk that you probably thought you were coming to hear. And that's our formation in the reception of mass media and in the use of it, because it's a tool. So how do we use it? But the first two are very important. The Catechism states that society has a right to information based on truth, freedom, and justice. I think we take for granted how accessible our right to information is in this country. I taught a media course to our 9th through 12th graders about 2 months ago, and they said, yeah, right to information, let's move on. And I said, think about the characteristic of a society where the right to information is curtailed. That one of the first things to go in a corrupt government or regime is access to information, or the control of information by the government. And so we can take our access to information quite casually, but it's not a right that's attributed or afforded in every society, and it's not a right we should assume will be there tomorrow, even in the United States. Everyone in this room accesses information. Some of you may be information junkies. I consider myself a semi-information junkie. I like to know what's going on. We also have the ability, with the media explosion, the internet in particular, to find our own niche sources of information. So you probably have, if you have your computer, your 5 or 6 main media stops, the main places where you find your information. Maybe you go to Vatican.va every day and find out what's going on at the Vatican. Maybe you go to EWTN.com for church documents. Maybe you visited the Real Presence website or the Hardon Media website. Maybe you watch Fox News. Maybe you listen to talk radio. As we form our consciences, let's say, for example, for the Catholic vote, I'd like to vote the Catholic conscience. How am I going to do that? How am I going to inform my conscience? We seek sources of information for that. And I really applaud all of those news and information entities that are fighting the fight to give strong and objective information out to the people. And we should be very wary of any limitations on that. Google has just had a strong battle in China against the freedom of the Google corporation and website to give information in China. It's been quite a battle. And it's on this question, society's right to information based on truth, freedom, and justice. Beyond a responsible press, so responsible places where we can find information, Inter Mirifica also calls for the establishment and support of an authentically Catholic press. So the Vatican takes this call very seriously. It has press organs that report specifically on the Catholic Church. The Vatican has a newspaper called L'Osservatore Romano. It comes out daily in Italian. That's not a lot of help for most people. It comes out weekly in English, German, French, and a variety of other languages. The Holy See Press Office also has a bulletin and press conferences and press releases. The Vatican Information Service is a daily fax and email report, strictly hard news from the Vatican, no commentary, no articles, no editorials, just the writings or teachings of the Holy Father for that day, his Wednesday audiences, for example. If you want them, they're available online. Information can become an evangelization opportunity. Straight information now. And this is where I'd like to talk about the death of Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul II was the most seen man in the world. And everyone here has seen Pope John Paul II. Whether you haven't seen him live, maybe you have seen him live, and if you have, that's an amazing grace that you've been given. But you've seen him because he got himself out to as many people as he could. He had a passion for communication, and he was a gifted communicator. He seriously contemplated a theatrical career before he became a priest. I worked at the Vatican Press Office under John Paul II's spokesman, Joaquin Navarro Valls, who was a consummate professional and took his duty of being available to the journalists and the mass media very seriously. And when John Paul II died, Navarro Valls had a major worldwide media event on his hands. The press flooded Rome. St. Peter's Square, the outside of the square, was camera after camera after camera after camera. It was MSNBC and then CNN and then Fox News. And then it was the equivalent for the Spanish press and the equivalent for the Italian press and the French and the English. The whole world wanted to know the last hours of Pope John Paul II's life. And Navarro Valls said the joke was on the journalists because they were evangelizing. They were giving message of the church to the world, and the world was watching. And the world was watching through television, through radio, on the internet. And the journalists were giving us the message of Christ. We watched the death of John Paul II, and I happened to be in Rome when Pope John Paul II died. It was just a providential grace that was given. We take our students to Rome every year. So you guys can call us up in spring break if you want to go on a trip to Rome. We take our 8th through 12th graders. And we were there when Pope John Paul II died, and we were praying in the square. And so I witnessed the event in real time. And Joaquin Navarro Valls said he had a problem about who would get the scoop, who would get the first information that John Paul II died, because the journalist who had that had the biggest story really of the decade. And he said he had to look at his options. If he sent a fax out to all the different news organizations, that would alphabetize. And ANSA or AP would get it first. And Zenit would get it last. And that's not fair. So we can't do that. And in the end, his solution was to ask every journalist who was the dedicated journalist covering the event of the death of Pope John Paul II for their news organization to have a dedicated separate cell phone. And to that cell phone would be sent a text message. Because if you send a text, as you know, you can send it to multiple text numbers and it arrives simultaneously to everyone. And a text would be sent out when Pope John Paul II had passed away. And that was the way that they decided that his news would be broadcast to the journalists. And then the journalists were off and running and covering the story. And Navarro Valls tells the story that he went down from the Pope's bedside after the Pope had passed away to the press pool. And the press pool was a room of hardened journalists, professionals, agnostics, atheists, multiple religions, not really a room of believing Catholics or Christians. And he said he went down to give them the news, and they were weeping. He said there wasn't a dry eye in the room, in the press pool. And that really says a lot about the impact that John Paul II had beyond those of us who had followed his life as faithful Catholics. The giving out of information can also be an opportunity. And that's when you have a moment of crisis. And I'm going to talk for a minute about the current crisis embroiling the Catholic Church, the sex abuse crisis. The world wants information from the Catholic Church. So the world is ready to listen to what the Catholic Church has to say. One of the most interesting things about any crisis of communication is that it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to talk because you've got the mic, even though people have handed you the mic to explain something that you might not want to talk about. We studied in my program in Rome that any crisis is an opportunity. If your airplane crashes, it's your opportunity to talk about your safety record. If you have time and people who want to talk to you, that's your moment to do as much as you can to be transparent and to give information, because just having information and facts can be a very healing process. Like those of you who followed the West Virginia mine situation, just having information for those families is a source of healing. It doesn't have to be the information they wanted, just true factual information. And just in the newspaper today, I'm sure many of you have followed this, but there's an article, Vatican Web Guide to Detail Abuse Accusations Process. The Vatican has made a decision to add an internet-based web guide to explain the process. I'll just read you the lead. The Vatican has launched a new transparency strategy to deal with the sex abuse crisis, planning to post a guide for lay people on the web to explain how it deals with abuse accusations against priests. So if you don't know who to call, if you don't know what the steps is, why is my process at the point it's at, this is supposed to truly help. That transparency, being available and giving information, can be a very, very positive response in being asked for information. The opposite of the truth is a lie, and so the other thing to take a look at is something that's purported as information, but that is not. And I'll just read 2 quotes from the Catechism. To lie is to speak or act against the truth in order to lead into error someone who has the right to know the truth. And you can think quickly of the lies that are spread through things like the television and movie industry, presenting false models of happiness, false ideals, false freedoms as goods, too often damaging man's right to the truth or a right relationship with God. So the things that are considered savvy in media models today might not be based on truth, often are not based on truth, but are sold as objectively good things. And so to have that filter is something I'll talk about when we get to formation. So beyond offering true and honest information, which is a huge responsibility in a free society, we're also called to use the media for the work of cultural promotion. And you can think, oh, cultural promotion. I went to this talk and I thought it would be interesting, and she talked about cultural promotion. If you look at the hit that American Idol has become, the music industry is probably at one of its peaks since it went to the modern culture. Cultural promotion, art, music, literature, is very, very, very much something that resonates in the human soul. Truth carries with it joy and splendor and spiritual beauty. And Edith Stein, who I wrote my doctorate on, talked about this theme, and she said that beauty is defined as anything which touches and moves the soul to respond. So that you can meet a beautiful person, you can see a beautiful landscape, you can be involved in a musical score. That beauty evangelizes. The beauty of the religious here evangelizes one another. The beauty of Archbishop Burke, when he gives his homily, evangelizes us. The beauty of the young people in this room evangelizes. World Youth Day, beyond a youth encounter with the Pope, is about youth evangelizing youth through their beauty, through their positive spirit, through their zeal. And so the Holy Father, John Paul II, wanted to harness this idea of beauty. And in the Jubilee year, he wrote the letter to artists, And he said the segment of the population who are artists have a very, very strong role in culture. And he wrote, in order to communicate the message entrusted to her by Christ, the church needs art. The artistic media, literature, painting, sculpture, music can capture and communicate the Christian message, often more powerfully than non-artistic media. I'd like to stop and think about the worldwide impact of Susan Boyle. Probably everyone in this room knows who Susan Boyle is, and if you don't, Google her, go on YouTube, and watch her clip. What did she do? Was she beautiful? Was she society's definition of the image of beauty? Obviously not, because at the beginning of the clip where she stands in front of the Britain's Got Talent judges, she's almost booed off the stage. And then she begins to sing. And she moves the human spirit of every person in that room. And she moved the human spirit of millions of people who watched and rewatched her clip on YouTube. She sung a song from Les Miserables. We can also think of Pope John Paul II's own life story. He was passionate about culture. And he lived in a time where, in defiance of the Nazis who had occupied his homeland of Poland, he joined a cultural resistance group. A cultural resistance group, what is that? To defy Nazi rule and the destruction of their nation, to resist not through violent means, but by an embrace, a defiant embrace of Polish literature and poetry, art and music. And there's a scene retold in George Weigel's papal biography, Witness to Hope, where Karol Wojtyła, so his name before he became Pope John Paul II, stood in a room after curfew, reading a selection of Polish poetry in an underground resistance meeting. And while he's reading that poetry, the Nazi propaganda loudspeakers outside begin to drown out his voice. And he does not stop reading. He knows that this expression of culture has the power to effect change and to break the power of the tyrant. Now, if he's willing to risk his life to read poetry in a room where his voice cannot be heard, how much more should we be promoting culture from the rooftops through the means of mass media, through the means of social communications? And I'm going to hand out a fun handout so you can take a look here. One of the main ways that we can evangelize is through film. Film is something that has captured the human imagination. And the films can be specifically Christian or specifically Catholic, or they can just have an appeal to the human spirit, a high moral quality and content. You think of some of the sports movies that you've watched, where they've changed your life in your belief of an underdog taking on the extreme. You think of Chariots of Fire. You think of incredible movies like It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life, we learned in our program, is the most powerful pro-life movie ever made. Why? Because it shows you the impact of the world if just one human life was removed from it. And you see the entire lack, the void that life needed to fill. And so I'm going to give you a list, and it's just fun. And please come up after and tell me I missed many films. It's listed in 2 categories. Must-see films, absolutely fabulous, just have to see them, can't die without. And great films. And great films is where we can truly evangelize. The definition of a great film, it must have a powerful storyline. Second to none, edge of your seat. It must have an appeal to the human spirit. It should have exceptional minor characters. So let's take It's a Wonderful Life. Clarence, Mr. Gower. The minor characters in It's a Wonderful Life are as memorable as the main. And it should, if at all possible, use the star system. Have a major studio actor in a lead so that it has A-list potential. So I'm going to hand this out. I'll just give 3 sections and just enjoy. I'll be moving on, but to get a sense that this is a place where we can change lives because people are accessing this. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. I had my class, again, 9th through 12th graders, and I said, we're going to watch film today. All right, what are we going to watch, Dr. E? It's called Mrs. Miniver, class. Mrs. Miniver? That doesn't sound like it's going to be very good. We watched Mrs. Miniver, which is on the film list there, 2 days in a row. I didn't bring the movie the third day. I thought we'd do a little lecturing. Dr. E, where's Mrs. Miniver? Aren't we going to finish Mrs. Miniver? So these films are fabulous. And they can impact the world. The last section that we go to is formation. And hopefully you're busy with your pen. Write some, write the ones. You see the great list isn't long enough, but it's a very high standard. So I'll take your suggestions. Formation. And as I said at the beginning, this is probably the aspect of the talk you thought you were coming to hear, but hopefully information and cultural promotion surprised you. The role of the Father John A. Hardon Media Apostolate is this third point, formation. To employ the means of social communication to announce the good news of salvation and to teach men how to use them properly. Excuse me. Now, the people in this room who are probably the best at using the means of social communication are the young people sitting on the floor. You need your DVD programmed, call someone on the floor. You buy a new cell phone, call someone on the floor. Pope Benedict just wrote a message, and I have it here, for, excuse me, for World Communications Day, and he said that young people are incredibly gifted in understanding media technology. Incredibly gifted. It's a language that you speak. It's a language that you understand. It's a language that's engaging. I saw the last talk end, and I saw the group go out, and everyone who was under 20 was looking at their cell phone on the way out the door. Why? Well, someone might have texted them. They're communicating. So, to teach men how to use these properly, I'm not going to talk about the technical use of media, but using it beyond for the message. Excuse me. In the year 2000, for the Jubilee of Journalists, as the church celebrated its Jubilee, it celebrated so many different segments of culture, and journalists were celebrated. Cardinal Foley wrote a document called Ethics in Communications, and I have that here if you'd like to look at it. He said that all the faithful, if you are a member of the Christian faithful, you need to get some kind of communications training in your school, from your pastor, that in some way the topic of media should be discussed amongst you. It should be a topic to be discussed and promoted, not avoided, not a negative, as a positive. How can we be learning more about media? He called it the frontline missionary role that we all have. Frontline missionary role. Frontline means battle. Missionary means uncharted territory. Role means your individual call. But there are challenges. I talked earlier about the dichotomy between good professional training, lacking a pastoral backing. And I talked to an American archbishop once regarding his archdiocesan communications office. And he said he had excellent staff professionally. They knew how to edit and publish a newspaper in their sleep. But that not one of them knew the faith or had church teaching and communications. Not one of them had read the church's documents. There is a considerable volume of official church teaching on media, and it's fabulous stuff. I'll name just a few. Messages to World Communications Day. Last year it was written by Pope Benedict XVI, particularly to youth. It's all about social media, Facebook, Twitter, interactive communications. Inter Mirifica, the document that my talk comes from. Aetatis Novae, Communio et Progressio, the Pope's letter to artists, to name just a few. All of the graduates of my Pontifical program are required to take an oath of fidelity to the magisterium when we finish our training, which will serve as a guide for our future work in the field of communications in the future. So if we're called to know how to use the media properly, we have a very distinctive task. And I'm going to take the role of formation on two levels. One, reception. We're all media receivers. What does that mean? And two, use. We want to get out there. We've been here. We've thought about it. What can I do in the media world? Everyone in this room is a media receiver. Even if you say, no, I'm not. Nope. I don't have a cell phone. I don't have a computer. I don't have a TV. I'm not a media receiver. It's not true. Why? Advertisements on the side of a bus, the music industry, film, internet resources, primetime television. We are bombarded with media more than we know. For Lent this year, I gave up the car radio. I thought, well, it's probably not going to be that hard. The car radio, little did I know, that meant not only music, that was talk radio, that was the weather, that was anything in the background in my car radio. Then I drove some high school students to a forensics meet. They were a little worried. Dr. E, it's a 2-hour drive. Could we put the radio on? No, sorry, I gave it up for Lent. You would be amazed how much media we imbibe without knowing it. I didn't watch any TV today, but I drove 2 hours there and back somewhere with the radio on the entire time. And most of the media that we use is unidirectional. Unidirectional, what does that mean? It means it's passively received by me and does not request me to go out of myself in any way. And it can have a deadening effect. It can have an isolating effect. It can also shape my vision of the world. The values in the media, the materialist and consumerist values can shape me. So if we're going to form our media reception, we have to form a fully human personality. I put on the board when I was teaching this course 2 words, growth and withering. That's your media temperature. That's your thermometer. Does your media use cause growth in you? Does it help your human personality to grow, to expand, or does it cause you to wither? We all know someone who has withered from media reception. So I put the words on the board and the class was a little uncomfortable and then a little excited, and then we began to discuss the idea. Think about the tendency you might have getting out of school, your mom picks you up. You have 2 choices. You can talk to your mom about the day on the 20-minute ride home. You can put your earbuds in and listen to your iPod. You can put your earbuds in and pretend to listen to your iPod. You can wait at a bus stop and do the same. Overuse of the media is another thing. So one is using media as a barrier to human relationships. Using media as an excuse. Particularly if you're insecure in a situation. Well, I'll just check and pretend I'm looking at my phone right now. I'll just listen to my iPod. Or overuse of the media. Hours, and I mean hours online. You go on to check one thing and 4 hours later, hours of gaming. Gaming becomes completely addictive. Not that it's bad, one game, but addictive. A quick trip online becoming a 4-hour Facebooking session. Did you finish your homework? I've been on Facebook for a little while. Why? It's addicting. One thing leads to the next, leads to the next, leads to the next. The barriers have to be formed by us. They're not embedded in the media. There are no barriers. The radio doesn't turn itself off. The internet doesn't shut itself down. Every now and then it gets a little messed up, and that's annoying. In the April issue, just this April, of Time magazine, the technology editor wrote about a radical, truly radical, life-changing, in his opinion, experiment in which he unplugged from the media for 24 hours. Just 24. He said it took him 2 days of email and phone calls to get ready to unplug for 24 hours. And then he talks about the experience. He was practically unable to experience reality when it wasn't experienced through a media filter. What does that mean? He gives examples. He went to a restaurant with his wife. She got up to use the bathroom. He did not know what to do because he could not check his phone or pretend to check his phone. He had that awkward social situation and he just had to sit there. What could you do? Talk to a waiter? Think? Be quiet? No. He said he was disorientated, then this is scary, driving without texting. He said there was nothing to think about but the speed he was going. Now, I just went to Rome, and if you've been to Assisi, and many of you I'm sure have, there's a very high hill with the hermitage of the Carcere where Francis used to go with his brothers. And I was coming down in a cab, and the cab driver was texting. And this is a mountain road with a cliff on one side and a little brush on the other. It's not a situation where you want your cab driver to be texting. And then he also realized that when he uses one form of media, he's often using multiple forms at the same time. He was on the phone with a journalist, and he said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't listening. While we were talking, I checked my email, I looked at Twitter, I looked at Facebook, and right now I'm on New York Times Online." The man he was talking to said, "Yeah, I've been doing the same thing. I wasn't listening to you either." So do we prefer a media filter in our lives, or can we handle direct experience of reality? Now, I said I would talk about the bullying case, and it's just one point. But I read a scenario of why bullying is on the rise, and one of the factors given was that we've become, as a society, and the more you're in the media, the more it's happening, so the younger generation tends to have this happen more, detached from basic social interaction. That I don't have to ask you face to face, would you like to get a coffee? I can text you that. I was sitting in the car today. We were going to pull out to come. I wanted to ask my sister a question. I started to call her on my phone. My mom said, "Go inside and ask her." So I'm sure you've done it. You telephone someone in your own house, text someone in your own house, email someone in your own office. Why? It's easier. Human interaction takes time. Human interaction sometimes takes guts. And so a detachment from social interaction by relying on media deadens our understanding of the human person. And then they've looked at that a little bit in the bullying. And I thought that was very, very interesting. That girl wasn't necessarily a person. She was someone we were Facebooking about. And even when she died, she was someone whose website we could go on and post, instead of a person, flesh and blood, who had feelings and emotions. So we get to Benedict XVI and his, please read it, 2009 World Communications Day document. He talks about the potential of social networking to build up communities of persons, all of the positives. And he warns at the same time about the empire of distraction that the media can become. And I'll read a quote because it's worth it. "Young people, in particular," he says, "have grasped the enormous capacity of the new media to foster connectedness, communication, and understanding between individuals and communities. They are turning to them as means of communicating with existing friends and meeting new friends, and of sharing their ideas and opinions." It's a forum, a positive forum for community. Many benefits flow from this new culture of communication. However, he points out it would be sad if our desire to sustain and develop online friendships were to be at the cost of our availability to engage with our families, our neighbors, and those we meet in the daily reality of our places of work, education, and recreation. If the desire for virtual connectedness becomes obsessive, it may in fact function to isolate individuals from real social interaction, while also disrupting, and think about this, patterns of rest, silence, and reflection that are necessary for healthy human development. Many of you might know Ryan Seacrest. He's the main announcer for American Idol. He suffers from sleep deprivation. You think, well, he's got it together. He's in charge of this major show. He is so addicted to his BlackBerry, and he has said this himself, he cannot sleep. He wakes up to check and see if he has a text or an email. And many of you, I'm sure, know working people who cannot leave work at work because the BlackBerry, mobile as it has become, means that your work is always with you. I could work right now while I give this talk. I'm sure I could email someone about something. So there isn't again, media doesn't put its own barriers down. And the more mobile it becomes, I think we're moving into a new generation. The digital generation is not just a demographic, the millennials, anyone under 30. And there was a study done. It's the first generation, and see if this is true if you're under 30 in this room. Is your cell phone next to your bed when you go to sleep? Is it the last thing you check before you go to bed and the first thing you check when you get up? And if the answer is yes or almost yes, then it's a new viewing of reality. But the digital generation is also an age. It's an age that we're in and moving into in a way that we don't know the parameters of. Steve Jobs of Apple just came out with the iPad, and it's a mobile computer that can do pretty much anything a computer or an iPhone can do, and the question is, well, why did you invent it? It's a tablet. He said, I don't know what it's going to become used for. So it's almost a media potential that's going to gain its own life. It's going to tell us what it needs, what it wants to do, where it wants to go. And so we don't know yet in the digital age where we'll go. So those are the types of withering to watch for. But growth, what about growth? How do we make sure we're growing when we use all the forms of media? Form your conscience, refining your critical sense so that you know when you go, for example, if your good taste is refined, exposure to history, philosophy, literature, drama, art, and music, you know and you have an internal standard and barometer of your own when you access media. That was an excellent film, that storyline. I've read the book and it was similar. You know when you watch a film rendition of an historical event. I've studied that event. I know that was on the money. That wasn't on the money. You can reject coarse programming or poor cultural quality, and you can embrace the positives, to not have a totally defensive or closed attitude to the media, like Father Hardon, to say, what are the ways we can help people to grow through the information and the formation that we can put out in the media. Creating a younger generation that's media educated, able to interact with and benefit from mass media offerings without falling subject to them. And if anyone thinks that's easy, it's not. For your own media use, I'm sure you've had your own challenges. It's one of the great challenges of our time. Church teaching offers 2 remedies as you're media educating yourself. Number 1, silence. And number 2, conversation. Those 2 things are to be found in your life as you're making sure that you're also as plugged in as you need to be delivering the gospel message. There was a study done of seminarians who came into the seminary in the digital age, and their ability to meditate had declined. Their ability to have silence, to be quiet, because they were used to being stimulated. And you can even see that the pace of advertisements has picked up, that our need for stimulation is only increasing. So silence, can you be comfortable to be quiet? Can you build it into your day? Can you turn the car radio on the way to work and off on the way home? Whatever silence would mean for you. And then conversation, which I think is the more powerful of the 2. Why? We talked about the unidirectional nature of media. It comes to a passive receiver. Conversation is a direct antidote to that. It asks you to go out of yourself and interact with another individual, to speak to them, to share ideas, to have an exchange. A conversation requires some time, and it's an art. And good conversationalists are fun. And we like to sit with them at dinner and find them for lunch and call them on the phone because they're good conversationalists. They like to discuss a topic from many angles, and they have something to say, and they're well read and well informed, and they offer something to a conversation. So those 2 things are very important to have in your arsenal, as it were. And then the right use of media. How do we use the media? How do we harness the power of Facebook? Is Christ on Facebook? Does Christ have a Facebook page? Should Christ have a Facebook page? Or if you're a Christian, Christ is on Facebook, or he should be. If you're a Christian, Christ is in a lot of ringtones, or he could be. There are multiple opportunities to bring the fact that we're Christians to the media world that we're already living in. John Paul II called the age we're moving into the springtime of the new evangelization. Evangelization has been around since Christ, but the new evangelization is now. We need the infrastructure of social communications, and the church needs to speak the language of the world. To be present at the modern Areopagus. In the ancient world, the Areopagus was a place of exchange of information and ideas, and you went there if you had something to say. The mass media structure is the modern Areopagus. We need to meet man where he is, where he lives, where he works, where he seeks entertainment, where he's seeking formation, because he's spending time in the media and he will meet Christ there if we bring Christ to the media. My program taught the technical aspects of journalism, television, radio, film, internet, public relations, and marketing. The social networking has become one of the main ways that communities are now formed. So there exists a great, great potential for the church in the 21st century because the globe has been linked for us. No longer do we have to walk from town to town. We can, but the globe has been linked for us. A network such as EWTN is broadcasting right now in dozens of languages to nations across the globe. It reaches North and South America, Europe, Australia, the Pacific Rim, parts of Asia, and the Middle East, and is launching into French-speaking programs to a myriad of Catholic places like French-speaking Africa. Father Mitch Pagua of EWTN came and gave a talk to our school about 2 years ago, and he said that the battle for the evangelization of the East and the re-evangelization of the West will take place very often by reaching the individual in his own home, in the protection of the four walls of his house where Christianity is not persecuted, because it's your own living room, you can finally embrace the gospel. So if the public square shuts Christ down, the mass media can still reach the individual in his home, one-on-one, through his computer, through his radio, through his television. Many of the priests who were studying with me were going back to their diocese to start the first Catholic radio, the first Catholic newspaper, to put up Catholic websites. So there's something to think about. Away from the pressures of culture, media can be accessed. It doesn't have to be accessed in groups. You, with your media, people can find Christ if they're looking. And how many people have said that about EWTN? I met a woman, beautiful woman, who was standing in St. Peter's Square 1 year after Pope John Paul II died. And today is the feast vigil of his death. He died on the vigil, Divine Mercy Sunday. So it's a big day for John Paul II. She was wearing a bright yellow sweatshirt, and she said, "I'd like to talk to you, but I have to stand right here. Can you come over to me?" She was standing by a specific pillar in St. Peter's Square, and I said, "Sure, what are you doing?" And she said, "EWTN is starting its live coverage. I told my friend to look for me. I'd be wearing this. I converted to the Catholic Church watching the coverage of the death of Pope John Paul II. She said, "I was an agnostic, and a wave of grace came through the television upon my life. I converted and entered the Catholic Church, and I'm celebrating my conversion here in Rome for Easter 1 year later." So that story is very possible. Would she have been standing there if EWTN had not existed? I don't think we can say. We're also called to professional presence in the news media in the field of journalism. I think of Mr. George Weigel, a consummate professional in this field. We must support film projects, large and small, be present on the radio, contribute to television programs, write editorials and letters, and use and promote Catholic websites of outstanding quality. As Mrs. Dory Gross, the founder of the Father Hardon Media Apostolate, told me, begin now, start here. If you don't own a television station, that is okay. Put Christ on your Facebook page. People come to your Facebook page. Do they know you're a Christian? Well, they should. We are called to bear witness to the God who is the truth and wills the truth. And in the end, the witness that we make to the gospel begins and ends with our own life. And I'll end with this thought. Edith Stein called each of us living witnesses. And her conversion story was as simple as they come. She was moved by the powerful effect of one individual on another, one individual living their faith. She walked into Frankfurt Cathedral, and she was there for an artistic experience. She was there to look at the cathedral. She wasn't a believer. And a woman walked in during a busy day with a market basket on her arm, and that woman had stopped to make a visit to the church, to speak to Christ, her friend. And Stein saw that woman had a friendship with someone who was so important to her that she would stop during her busy day and come in to visit that person. It was a person, capital P, that Stein didn't know. And she vowed to come to know that person as an intimate friend. For Stein, her journey of faith culminated in martyrdom. Her beliefs were put to death in the death camps of Auschwitz concentration camp. Martyrdom, then, is the supreme witness given to the truth of the faith. Martyrdom means bearing witness, even unto death. For Stein, lived witness was a masterpiece that would touch and move other souls to respond. We think of the lived witness of Mother Teresa and her worldwide impact of one individual, Pope John Paul II, the first pope to launch a website and have an email account. We think of those who live radical, charismatic, powerful lives and the impact that they have on us. So I would end by saying, in order to communicate the message entrusted to her by Christ, in order to preach the gospel in the digital age, the church needs saints, needs individuals whose life choices capture our attention and command our respect amidst the din and the clamor of a world saturated with competing media messages. And a great call falls to young Catholic believers to make dynamic change in their media reality. Pope Benedict asks the millennials, quote, to bring the witness of their faith to the digital world. It falls to young people who have an almost spontaneous affinity for the new means of communication to take on the responsibility for the evangelization of the digital continent. So if you wanted mission territory, the digital continent has been declared to bring Christ to their digital reality. Father Hardon said, unless we recover the zeal of the early Christians, the days of America are numbered. So may we, young and old, not shirk from this task and from this potential. May we forge ahead into the world, and may we harness the potential which the digital revolution affords. May Pope John Paul II, Father Hardon, and our Blessed Mother help us in our efforts to become saints ourselves in the process. Thank you.